Welcome to the Book Hook podcast, where I've got cool insider book info, author and industry expert interviews, book reviews, and much more. Today, I'm chatting with Laura R. Samotin about the Cursed Crown Duology, writing from a place of trauma, and creating an all-Jewish fantasy world, and a few other things in between.
Hi, I'm Laura R. Samotin. I'm the author of the Cursed Crown Duology. The first book is The Sins on Their Bones, and the second book is The Lure of Their Graves. Both are out now.
Well, thank you for being here, Laura.
Of course.
It's, for me, it's early in the morning. I don't know what your writerly schedule is like, if you're a morning or a night owl.
I am generally a morning person. So, but I say generally, very, very loosely, because sometimes I become a night owl and it really all depends on kind of what other people's schedules are. Right? If everyone wants to hang out at night, I guess I'm going to be a night owl.
Oh, wow. So you actually, I would be like, no, you want to hang out? No.
I'm flexible when it comes to timing. But yeah, generally I'm a pretty strict, 7:15 wake up, start work by 8 type of person. I do my best writing in the morning for sure.
So I do know, I think it was The Sins on Their Bones that you wrote it in the first draft in a month, something like that.
I did.
Tell me everything.
I got this idea, and my books usually come out one of two ways. So the first way is that I call it getting hit with the idea stick. The book will come to me and I will know exactly what the story is supposed to be, or at least the first draft of it. I'll know the characters. They will be pretty vivid, right away for me. Mm-hmm. And that was how Sins kind of came to me. So it's much preferable, by the way, to the second method, which is where I struggle to pull out the story and it takes me forever to write. So I went into drafting this in June of 2021, and I know that I wrote it over 30 days in 19 and a half hours. And the reason that I know exactly how long it took me to write the first draft is because when I'm drafting, I listen to one song on repeat and then I basically never listen to it again. So I loop a single song. And for this book, it was Ludovico Einaudi's Experience. And when it came time to get my Spotify Wrapped that December, it was congratulations, you are Ludovico Einaudi's top 0.25% fan for the song Experience. You listened for 19 and a half hours. And I was on the one hand, okay, now I know how long it took me to write. But on the other hand, I was how is that not top 0.0001% fan?
When you start a project, do you start with a song in your head? You start with a playlist?
I make playlists for all of my books, but right. I don't start with the playlists. Okay. So when I'm drafting, I can only really listen to instrumental music. I can really only listen to one thing over and over again. Otherwise, my brain gets too distracted by what I'm listening to, and I stop thinking about writing and start thinking about the music. That said, once I have a complete draft, I do really enjoy making character playlists or book playlists, and I listen to them just when I'm out and about and brainstorming, because sometimes I think listening to music with the vibe that you want does help you get that right. So music is a big part of kind of my writing process, but it's different at different stages of the book. Revising doesn't really have if I'm sitting down at my computer, typing for revision, it doesn't really have a song. I usually listen to, this is lame, but productivity music.
Yeah.
When you go on YouTube and you type in 360 hertz noise for brain working.
Yeah. I do the same.
Right? I'm usually listening to that kind of stuff because that's a different kind of work to me. I have to actually sit and focus. And so that's for me, that's not music time. That's please, dear God, someone help my brain work better time.
Yeah, I
dial it in
that.
time.
Yeah, I get it. So where did the idea of the Cursed Crown duology, first of all, did you envision it as a duology when you started writing Sins?
Well, I think now that the second book is out, I probably can tell this story in public. Okay. No, I didn't. When I wrote The Sins on Their Bones, I thought I was writing an open and shut book. And if you've read it, you might realize that it is pretty open and shut if you ignore the last page in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one, I think it's a 375 word single page cliffhanger. Mm-hmm. So the reason for that is because, I thought it was just going to sell as as a standalone. And that's very, very common when it comes to debut writers.
Mhm.
So most of the time, if you're new, your publisher will acquire a single book from you. And even if it's a series, they will, they'll say, we're going to start with one. And if it does well, then we'll purchase the others. So for me, I was like, I'm just going to start off with a standalone because I don't think I have hope of someone like taking a chance on a duology. So then my agent at the time called me and she said, congratulations, you have an offer on the duology.
What?
And I said, what duology? There's no duology. This is a standalone. And she said, Laura,
not now.
she's like, you have an offer on the duology. And I said, there is no duology. And she said, there is now.
Make it happen.
Make it happen. I didn't want to leave like a terrible cliffhanger for people, right? Because that always annoys me. And I knew that there was going to be about a year gap between these two books. And so it was like, I don't know, I call it like a baby cliffhanger. What do you think? Because you read it.
Because I'm a writer, so I have a little bit of insight. It's hard for me to read as a reader. And I think
that
you know
makes that makes total sense.
So when I got to the end, sort of like Vasily and Dmitri, sort of their arc, I was like, okay, I know it. Yeah, I can see how this would be a standalone. And then we have the last chapter, and yeah, it's like 2 pages. And I'm like, oh, I see what happened here because it is a debut. The potential was just for the one book, but oh no, the publisher, I thought the publisher was like, you know what? Let's have a second one. After the first would come out, they would do the second. I didn't know it was sold together.
It was sold together.
Yeah.
So I was very, very lucky that they took that chance on me, right? Like that is very rare. And I'm like forever grateful that they right off the bat were like, nope, we're going to make this a complete series, because it allowed me to start thinking more expansively about what I wanted Dmitri and Vasily's story to look like, right? Yeah. They do reach a resolution in the first book, but their arc isn't like their healing arc is not finished, right? They're in a decent place compared to where they were, but that's not hard.
Yeah.
And so I really wanted to make sure that they got the catharsis and like the true lasting final healing that they deserved. And being able to plan it out as a duology was really, really helpful in that regard.
I wanted to ask about the trauma this is it's a very dark novel. The first one is a very dark novel. I didn't think that the second one was as dark. It was very cathartic. There was tons of love and patience and care. It has a different feel to it. The Sins on Their Bones was very dark, filled with grief, filled with trauma, filled with PTSD. How were you able to write that?
This is a good one, because no one's asked me this question before. I think that as a writer, I obviously am borrowing from pieces of myself and my own experience. I talk about this in the author's note at the end, but I was in a similar abusive relationship, and luckily didn't cause a civil war where, hundreds of thousands of people died. That's right.
Details.
But these are experiences that I shared with Dmitri. And so part of it was me writing from my own experience. And that to me was cathartic, because I was able to excavate my own healing journey. And I think that what Vasily says is true. I'm not going to spoil like when he says that, but he does make a comment. It's like, you can't blame yourself for what happened unless you're prepared to blame me for what happened to me too. And so I think like in a way it's like, unless I'm prepared to blame my characters for what I'm putting them through, I can't blame myself. So I do think that was actually quite a healing thing for me. When it comes to just writing general like dark fantasy, I do think that I'm just able to separate it out too. Like in a way, writing is magical, but writing is also kind of part of my job, right? And so it's separate. Like I'm very well aware that like I'm putting these characters in this situation. I could get them out if I wanted to. Also, it's not, at the end of the day, they're not real, luckily. And so I think that's kind of how I think about protecting my own mental health. I'm also obviously, because I'm the author, going to 100% choose not to write about stuff that truly deeply distresses me. Like I will never write animal death. I'll never write something bad, like torture or like injury or death of a child. Like I'm not,
Yeah.
there are, I will never write like on page rape. There are things that I 100% can't handle in my real life being exposed to. And so I'm obviously going to pick not to cover those in my book. Yeah, I know my hard limits as a person and as a reader, and so as a writer I'm just not going to cross those limits. Like you have to know yourself well enough to know that you're not exposing yourself to, you know, creating your own like material that's going to harm your mental health.
Yeah, I can see in Sins how that would have been a balance for you. I also, to be honest, if Sins had been out while I was researching my own book, I probably would have included it in my own book, which explores how we are able to use fantasy as sort of like a landscape to work through our own trauma, to work through our own, you know, quote unquote otherness.
Can you just give me what your book is about? Is it nonfiction?
Yeah, it's called The Monster in the Mirror, and it is a blended genre of memoir and literary and cultural critique, and it is about sort of an investigation, interrogation of how stories of mental illness and othering, including, you know, autism, ADHD, are framed within fantasy narratives. So I talk about like Game of Thrones, I talk about Lord of the Rings, D&D, video gaming, TTRPGs, virtual reality, that sort of thing. It was my pseudo PhD love letter to fantasy. So you can see how I would have included Sins, and this is why I'm so fascinated by it and why I appreciate it so much, because I kind of feel like Sins it is the epitome of using fantasy as a landscape, or as like, you know, Star Trek's holodeck, to explore these other possibilities, these other realities that we may have experienced in our own life. I'm sure a lot of your readers have been through trauma, maybe not as serious as what, you know, or as what your characters have been through, but to see what happens coming through the other end. And then to follow up the lore of their graves is, like you said, that sort of healing catharsis, healing.
Yeah. I also really wanted to make sure that I depicted a realistic healing journey. So like a lot of times in fantasy, especially when you have a character who is dealing with trauma or mental illness, something will happen. It's usually something related to magic or whatever, or they just like get over it and then they're better. And maybe that's some people's journey, but that's not mine and never has been, and it's not the journey of a lot of people that I know. And so I wanted something that was much more realistic, because Dimitri is struggling quite deeply at the beginning of the book. He's like self-medicating with alcohol, he's doing a lot of bed rotting, and he just thinks that this whole thing is his fault, which in a way, it like parts of the war like are actually his fault.
Yeah.
So he's dealing with this really complex trauma situation, and his friends are like, we can help you get better, but you need to want to get better.
Yeah.
And he does end up making the conscious choice that he wants to pursue healing. He does it with the help of medication, which was my own little invention in this fantasy world. But, you know, he medicates himself for anxiety and depression. He does a lot of internal work and seeks support from his friends, and you know, gradually builds himself back up, but the healing is not linear. It is, you know, 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah.
And that was something that was really important to me to depict, because I hope that that's something that resonates with people who haven't necessarily had a very linear healing journey. Sometimes you feel better about yourself, sometimes you don't, and that's okay. All that matters is that you kind of keep trying to get on that upward path.
There is something very true and very real about the healing journey that all the characters go through, but specifically Dimitri goes through, and that how messy, how ugly, how gritty and sticky it is. And that felt very real to me. And I think that was one of the reasons why I was so like, oh my God. I did the immersive read. I was telling you before, I did the immersive read. And for listeners, viewers, you need to do the immersive read where you listen to the audiobook at the same time you actually read along. That is pure immersion, and the actors who did the audiobook were so
They're so good.
perfect.
They're
Oh,
so good. All
yeah.
three of them are extremely talented. So it's a full cast audiobook. Well, not full cast, but it's the three
Yeah.
narrators represent the three POV characters, and so you got people who I just thought were absolutely perfect for the characters that they were portraying. It's like actually really scary, I think, to listen to Robin Wilcox as Alexi. Like he like scares me, and he scared me in his voice sample, which is how I was like, oh my god, this is Alexi.
Yeah.
And then I think Aaron and Daniel as Dimitri and Vasily are also just like so excellent. They really, I think, bring a lot of emotion and feeling to their performances, and it's really a treat.
So I'm curious, I do know when the Sins on Their Bones, you started thinking of this, you started writing it. It was a very tumultuous time, scary time in your own life. I'm wondering if we can
Mm-hmm.
dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's probably not a surprise to people who know me that I wrote a book set in 1890s Eastern Europe, only because when I was writing this book, I was actually suffering from tuberculosis. When I say that, a lot of people think it's a joke. It's not.
No.
I was very, very, very ill, and I actually ended up going through treatment for tuberculosis during the revision process. And so one of my editor's comments when we were revising the book was like, why are these characters always nauseous? You know, why are they always like vomiting on their boots or like wanting to vomit or like why are their stomachs always hurting? And I was like, oh, it's because mine does all the time. And I accidentally put that in. So we had to do a 70% reduction in what she called stomach-based reactions.
Oh my
But yeah,
goodness.
it was a very weird time in my own life. And so it was a relief in a way to get to escape into a different world. And like I said, kind of what I was dealing with medically matched to the time period of my characters. And that wasn't
Yeah.
super intentional, but it was also a little bit cathartic in its own way. So yeah, this book was an escape for me in more ways than one.
It is also Jewish folklore inspired.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of research went into
Mm-hmm.
this?
For those who don't know, the Cursed Crown Duology is based entirely on Jewish myth, mysticism, and magic. The magic that's described in the book or the rituals that are described in the book are completely real. When I say real, like real in air quotes, they were taken from existing sources and descriptions. I think that for me, one of the really cool things about doing this project and making that decision that I wanted to like use my, history and my culture, my folklore to create this world was getting to learn more about things that I kind of like sort of knew, but wasn't super familiar with. So I'll give you an example. Growing up, my grandparents wouldn't really drink out of, or like I was always told, like, don't drink out of water that's been left on the counter overnight because it's like dirty. And I was like, that's like, okay, maybe dust got into the water and I get that, like, don't, whatever. And I think that's what everyone is just referring to is like, maybe stuff got into your water. But in Eastern Europe, Jews were actually afraid that demons would have gotten into uncovered water overnight.
Wow.
So it's kind of funny, right? But they thought that if you drank the water, the demon could have the chance to possess you. So it was interesting and funny to me to get to figure out some of the actual like history or culture behind things that for me were just like superstitions that my family had that we didn't really know why. But that was really cool. And I have an academic research background, and so I was able to use that to read a lot of the academic research on Ashkenazi Jewish, which is Eastern European Jewish, folk tales and folklore. So it was just a really cool process of getting to learn more about my own culture and religion and ethnicity and the way that my ancestors who lived in Eastern Europe at the time would have lived and what they might have believed and what superstitions they might have had and what they might have done to try to keep safe. So that was really cool. And it was a special part of it for me, getting to reconnect with, a part of my history that I
Yeah.
didn't previously know.
Yeah, that's amazing. And from that too, you concocted these two sects of these religions. We have the holy science and we have the what's the name of the other one?
It's not really named, it's just like default,
Default,
the
yeah.
default religion. I
And they
named
clash.
I named Alexi's weird offshoot, but I didn't name the default. That's actually probably a good point. But too late now. Yes, I was really interested in what would have happened. Obviously, this is a Jewish normative world, and
Mm,
that to me meant that the default religion was Judaism, and like so, all the characters are Jewish. They
yeah,
just are. That's like the state religion is Judaism. People just don't question that, and most
yeah,
people that they would encounter in their daily life were Jews. That also meant that Jewish characters were not ever going to be persecuted or harmed for their religion.
yeah.
And that stands in really stark contrast to what actually happened in Eastern Europe, which was a very, very long history of anti Semitism and pogroms and Jews being, either outright killed or harmed or severely disadvantaged by the governments that they were living under, from
Yeah.
like the imperial government in Russia all the way down to their local neighbors. And so I wanted to kind of ask myself, what would have happened if we were in a Jewish normative world and everyone was Jewish? And in my mind, it was like, Christianity went through all of these like rifts and different
Mm,
developmental phases. And, you get people splitting off from one, you have Protestants, you have the Church of England, you have like all of these different configurations. And I thought to myself, if Jewish religion had not gone through what scholars call the Reformation in the 1800s, which was basically denuding Judaism of as much pagan type or magic type stuff as possible, making worship seem a lot more like a Christian worship service, basically
mhm.
trying to Christianize Judaism to keep congregants safe. I feel like we would have had kind of the same stuff that Christianity had, where there are people who went like, hey, we're going to go more traditional with the religion. Oh, we're going to have people who are maybe more into like the magic and spirituality side of it. We're going to have people who are more mainstream. That's not to say that Judaism today does not have sex. We absolutely do.
Mhm.
But I was thinking about this specifically as like, what would it be like in this world? So that's how I came to Alexi having his own kind of scary version of religion. He practices what he calls the holy science. You know that
Mhm.
you're in trouble when you name your own religion. And his practices borrow a lot from some of the really kind of like edge case Kabbalah writings from the time and from earlier, and some of these more like wilder tales of like consorting with demons to get them to do your bidding. So he's definitely taken it to a serious extreme.
Yeah. He's weaponized it basically, and used it
Absolutely.
for power.
He's also like he is 100% a Delulu is the Salulu man. Like
I love that.
he 100% believes that this guy, he just goes all in.
I'm wondering too, like as you were saying that, I was again thinking of using fantasy as this playground to explore different, like alternate realities. What did that feel like creating a world where Judaism is just norm? It's norm. There's no persecution for being Jewish. There's acceptance, particularly as queer Jews too. I mean, the entire book is queer. Both of them are. What was that like writing that and exploring that world for you?
To me, it was extremely freeing and also a little bit sad. Like,
Okay.
I wrote a book I wanted to read because, ever since I was growing up, most books that feature Jews or Judaism are like Holocaust books
Yeah.
or books about bad times in Jewish history. So, like,
Yeah.
I read a lot of Holocaust books growing up, and Jewish characters were featured either as victims or as heroes because they were punching Nazis. And neither of those really resonated with me. And I just hated the fact that the Jewish characters didn't get to be fully realized people because they were reduced to one of the worst times in our collective history. And it just also doesn't feel good to only see yourself represented that way. And so I really wanted to do something different where Jewish readers could sink into a world where they would recognize the culture and the religion and the food and everything, and not have to worry that something bad was going to happen because someone was going to come out of nowhere and like start a pogrom. But it was also sad because it does not reflect our world today. And I think that it's always bittersweet to envision the world that you want to see, and know that you're not there yet and you don't know if you will get there. But I do think it's a pretty radical act of hope to put that out there and let people read it and dream about it and see themselves reflected in it. And I also think, one of my goals with the Cursed Crown Duology was to introduce my own religion and culture to readers who might not be familiar with it. Because, as I say in the author's note, if you've read this book and you liked Dimitri and you liked Vasily and you hated Alexei because he was a jerk, but also kind of thought he was weirdly hot, like, you have fallen in love with Jewish characters, even if you didn't know it. And so maybe that attitude will carry with you in the real world as well.
Yeah, it feels very welcoming. I mean, other than being extremely dark and slightly traumatizing, which we love. I mean, I went down the TikTok rabbit hole where people like, there is so much trauma in this. It's so dark. I loved it. It does feel like it's warm and welcoming, and it invites the reader, Jewish or not Jewish, to immerse themselves in this world. And particularly for somebody like me, I am not Jewish. I felt immersed in this world and welcomed into this world, as dark as it may be. And there is something, it did feel in that way radical to me. And I love that you use that term because, and right now too, I feel like we do need books like this, particularly with the rise of anti-Semitism again in this world. Books like this are more important now than ever. And again, like I said, if the Sins on Their Bones had have been out when I was researching my book, it would have had its own chapter. So here we are now on a podcast. This is an extension chapter. So I'm wondering, speaking of writer and writerly identity, when did writing start for you?
So I wrote my first book called The Rat and the Mouse when I was 8 years old. And it was actually similarly really dark. So it was the story of a rat commander and a mouse commander that were in an epic battle. And it was a whole 30 pages long. The rat commander was named Clooney, and the mouse commander was named Matamito. So it opens with Matamito actually killing Clooney in a forest in a one-on-one duel. And as Clooney is dying, he goes, Matamito, we're brothers. And then he drops dead. And then the rest of the 28 pages are Matamito wandering through the forest, contemplating the nature of life and whatever. And I mean, look,
at 8,
parents must have read it. I was really dark. If my 8-year-old wrote that, I'd be like, are you okay? But I loved writing from the time I was a kid, and I was very, very lucky to have parents who always encouraged me to write my crazy little stories. And I kind of didn't do anything with it past middle school because I had a lot of other extracurriculars that needed attention, and I was in college, and then I was getting my PhD. And so when the pandemic hit, I actually was like, what am I going to do for the next 3 weeks when the world is shut down? And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to watch all of Tiger King. And that took 2 days.
Reasonable.
Then I'm going to bake some sourdough bread. So I baked 4 loaves, and I was like, okay, I did it. And then I was like, well, what else am I going to do? Because clearly this is only going to last for 2 weeks. So I was like, I'm going to write a book. So a friend and I actually traded chapters back and forth. And I wrote a young adult fantasy. It wasn't very good. But it got me back into the idea of writing as a hobby that I could do now. And so I kind of carried that through the last 5 years. And it's, this is not my day job, but I'm very lucky to get to do it and put stories on shelves for readers. So I'm still a baby writer, but I'm an enthusiastic one.
You're a baby writer with a lot of ideas and projects that are slated to come out. What is it, next year and the year after, I think?
Yes. So the next book that I have coming out is a gay dark academia horror. It's called The Way It Haunted Him, and it is coming out in June of 2026 from Titan Books. It's the story of Michael, who's a translator. His boyfriend has unfortunately just passed away, and as part of his grieving process, he goes to the mysterious archive that his boyfriend was supposed to visit for his dissertation and tries to complete it. And let's just say everything does not go as planned. And part of that is instead of the 83-year-old archivist that's supposed to greet him, it is his young, hot grandson.
What?
Yeah.
That is banana. Okay, so I see where this is going.
Yeah.
So is that one already drafted?
Yes, I'm actually in the process of revising it right now.
That's so cool. When are we going to have a cover reveal?
That's a great question. I have no idea.
Okay, well, you're going to have to let me know.
At some point. Yeah, of
I
course.
will be stalking your Instagram, not that I don't already. Looking back on that 8-year-old kid, I know I just jumped there.
That's okay.
I kind of want to go back to that 8-year-old kid and the person you are now. Did you think that you would ever become an author?
When I was 8, I absolutely believed I would become an author because in that book that I wrote, The Rat and the Mouse, there was like it was a school project, so there was like a little book plate on the inside that was about the author. So it was like, Laura, age 8, it's like, what are you good at? Writing. What do you want to be when you grow up? Author.
That's amazing.
So 8-year-old me knew.
I feel like that's a common thread with a lot of
Mhm.
authors is that, when they were kids, I know it was for me, when they were kids, all they did was write. And it was just sort of this, it wasn't even an idea. It was like this firm concept that they had in their head that I'm going to be a writer. That's it. But then
Mhm.
life happens, as we all know,
Yeah,
because being a
life
writer
happens.
does not pay very
Yep.
well. As we all know.
It's definitely a hobby.
Oh my God. It's a hobby that is a sometimes paying hobby. So, one last question for you, or sort of last ending note. What advice do you have for writers who are, not really sure if they're writers yet, but they have that, they're coming back to that?
Well, everyone's a writer. So if you're not sure if you're a writer, you're wrong. Because everyone is a writer and everyone has a story to tell. The advice that I give to newer writers or writers who have not yet finished their first project is like, this is the most frustrating advice that you'll get, but you have to write the book first.
Yeah.
Like,
Nobody
do
wants to hear
whatever
that.
you need to do to finish the book, because I
Yeah.
think what separates most people who have story ideas from the few people who actually like produce a whole book is the dedication to just sit down day after day and spend your free time and your lunch breaks and your commute and whatever, like 15 minutes before you go to bed, writing down your ideas. And so to me, that's the key differentiator, and that's the thing that will start off your road to success. Is you just have to be persistent in doing it and making time for it, and you can't overthink yourself so much that you end up never finishing a book, right? Because the agent always says, like, you can't edit a blank page, and that's very true, right? You can always make something better, but it has to be finished first. People don't publish unfinished books. So if you are someone who's thinking you might be a writer, you absolutely are a writer. Go, take the long walk to the typewriter and, just you finish your book. It doesn't matter if it takes you 5 years to finish, as long as you get there in the end.